Thank you for coming. This is the second week in a 3-week series that I'm doing on learning from conflict. I think everybody knows who I am. I'm Larry Barber. I'm a pastoral counselor working for Charis Foundation. And I work with a lot of pastors, and I have a community practice that sort of helps pay the bills. So what I've been doing is, rather than when I normally do this model that I've done in the past, I normally just talk about help people understand the sort of dynamics of what happens in relationships when people interact in particular ways. And I'm doing this series a little different because I really want to focus on the decisions that people make. And I think by looking at the decisions we make, my hope is that it will actually be helpful for us to learn. So we can see them, we can see the decisions we make, we can see the consequences of our decisions, and I hope that is helpful. The reason that's important is because the truth is that we don't do well with conflict. We don't learn well. We don't easily connect the dots between the choices that we make and what happens, actually the consequences of what happens. We keep making the same choices over and over again and expect different results. And then we wonder, how did we get here? How did this happen? So again, I'm trying to focus on the choices that we make and sort of highlight those. So I'm going to do a little bit of a review, and then let me hang on a second. I've got some handouts for people. The handout that you have is just a list of principles for sort of relationships that I kind of base what I'm doing on. And I think you can probably go through that and see where that gets covered. Again, the series is focused on the choices we make from when we have conflict so that we can hopefully learn from them. I'd like to read a passage in Romans 6. And let me give you just a quick, brief background of Romans. Romans was written by Paul. It was written to a church in Rome that was made up of Gentiles exclusively. A number of years before that, 7 years before that, there was a big conflict. The guy that was in charge in Rome kicked all the Jews out for 7 years, and they've gone, kicked them all out. So there are no Jews in the Gentile church. It's all Gentiles. There are no Jews in Rome. So that guy died, and now the Jews are coming back. And Paul is writing this letter to the church in Rome who are Gentiles, and he's saying, okay, here's what's coming, here's what you're going to need to know, how to work with this, how to respond to this, here's the issues that are going to be brought up. From chapter 6 on, the structure of the book is a series of rhetorical questions. Here's a question, here's an answer, out of that answer comes another question, out of that answer comes another question. That's sort of the structure from chapter 6 on to chapter 12 in Romans. This question is, shall we sin because we are not under law but under grace? May it never be. Do you not know that when you present yourselves to someone as slaves for obedience, you are slaves of the one to whom you obey, either sin resulting in death or obedience resulting in righteousness? But thanks be to God, though you were slaves to sin, you became obedient to the heart, to that form of teaching to which you were committed. And having been freed from sin, you became slaves of righteousness. I am speaking in human terms because of the weakness of your flesh. For just as you present your members as slaves to impurity and to lawlessness, resulting in further lawlessness, so now you present your members as slaves to righteousness, resulting in sanctification. For when you were slaves to sin, you were free in regard to righteousness. Therefore, what benefit were you then deriving from the things from which you are now ashamed? For the outcome of those things is death. So what Paul is answering, he's addressing a question about, was the law given for the intent of motivating people to not sin? That's the assumption of the question. Are we continue in sin, but we're not under law, but under grace? He's going, no. And he talks about the motivation. What he's really getting at is that the motivation for choosing righteousness is the consequences of righteousness, because the consequences of sin brings death. The consequences for making good choices bring life. And that's what I'm trying to get at here, is helping you see that when we use comfort strategies that we talked about last week, the consequence was death. The consequence was more pain. Okay? That makes sense? Any questions about any of that? So Paul's not saying that the law is not the motivation to not sin, the consequences of our choices. So God has hardwired the universe in such a way that our choices and the consequences of our choices are the actual motivation to learn. So what I'm trying to help you do is look at what happens, what kind of choices do you make when we have conflict, and so we can learn from the consequences, okay? So learning is really important. Learning is the foundation for healthy relationships, and it is the basis for what we're going to talk about next week, and that is repair, okay? Last week we asked two questions. The first question was, what do you want from relationships? And, this is being difficult. Yes? Sure.
I just want to understand what you're saying there. Are you saying that the consequences of good decisions is the incentive for making good decisions? Or are the consequences, so tell me if this question makes sense. It seems like there are two paradigms. One is that the consequences of good decisions is the incentive for making good decisions. The other paradigm is that consequences of good decisions are an outcome of choosing goodness.
Yes, the second.
Okay. Do you see the you see the difference?
I do.
Okay.
The second. Yes, exactly.
That's helpful.
Yes. Sorry, that wasn't clear.
No, I think that's it sounds like it's splitting hairs, but like in Purity of Heart, Kierkegaard's talking about like the reward disease.
Yes.
Why do you pursue heaven? Because it'll be so great. And it's like, well, he's like, that's
well, I think
not,
one of the things Paul says here is, aren't you tired? Aren't you tired of the death that you experienced? Yeah, I do think that experiencing death from the choices that we make and the pain that comes from that is a good motivation for wanting to choose righteousness.
if we want to learn from it.
That's exactly right. Yes. Yes.
But our capacity for actually wanting death is quite high as human beings, unfortunately.
Yes, our capacity for the experience of it is quite high. Yes.
In other words, yes.
Yeah.
We will choose that.
You're being really hard now.
Am I? Again?
I mean, you're like, okay, so here's the list that we made, or the things that we hope for from relationships. And we talked about trust and honesty and truthfulness and listening, encouragement, vulnerability, respect, empathy, intimacy, hearing, self-reflection, personal responsibility, being present, capacity, love. Okay? The other list we made up, you guys are being difficult. Oh, no, I'm missing it. Was actually, what is our experience when we have conflict? And so this is the list that you all came up with. All these kind of bad things: shut down, fear, overreacting, anger, fracture, betrayal, defensiveness, bitterness, unreasonableness, unknown, powerlessness. All these are the consequences of when we have conflict. So the question that I raised was, how do we get from wanting what is so good to this experience of having so much pain? What happens? How do we get there? Okay. So what did you guys figure out? How do we get there? What did you hear me say?
We want comfort.
We want comfort. So we make decisions with the intent of wanting comfort. Yes. So I'm going to take this off. So we looked at some choices that we make. In response to conflict. Do you remember what those choices were, or the kinds of choices those were?
Getting big.
Intimidation. Okay, we're going to do this one at a time real quickly. Being big. Okay, what were some ways in which we got big? Just a couple. Yelling. This is for you guys.
Stomping.
Stomping. That was one, right? That was a new one. Okay. Threatening.
Sarcasm.
Sarcasm. Threatening. Okay.
Getting in somebody's personal space. Physically.
Physically getting in somebody's space. Okay. Okay. So we drew that like this. Here's Larry, and Larry gets big. Remember what we talked about, even if Christine's here, what happened? I'm sorry? I put up walls, exactly. I put a big wall around myself, all by myself. I'm impenetrable. You're not getting to me. One, what else? That's what happened intrapersonally. Remember I made the distinction between interpersonal? Interpersonal is how Larissa and I interact with each other. Interpersonally is my relationship with myself. Okay? So before Christine even responds, I have put a wall around myself. I've isolated myself. And what else? What's the basis of in this particular self-protection or comfort strategy? Fear. Fear if I don't do this, I won't get my way or something bad's going to happen. So I am giving by getting big, I'm giving myself a very different emotional experience with myself. Instead of feeling small and scared and weak and vulnerable, I feel big and strong and powerful. Okay? So what happens though in the relationship is I get in my own way of the very thing that I said I wanted on that first list. I sabotage myself. Okay? You see that? Any questions about this one? Okay. So let's draw the next one. Does everybody remember the next one? Complicity, compliant? Okay. Compliant. Okay. Remember what that looked like? Let's give what are some examples of complicity?
You go along to get along.
Okay.
Pacification. Pacification.
Passive. Be passive? Yes. Okay. So let's say We drew that like this. It's kind of hard to find, kind of invisible. I'm not telling you what I want or think or feel or believe as a way of avoiding the discomfort of conflict. So what happens? What was the consequence of my choice to be complicit?
We leave Christine feeling all alone.
I am alone. That's right. Why am I alone? What makes me alone? That's correct. You can't find me. I'm not telling you who I am. One of the other consequences of complicity is that I give up my voice by myself. Okay, so any questions about this one? Okay. What was the next one? Withdraw. Okay. What are some ways we withdraw?
Silent treatment.
I'm sorry?
Silent treatment.
Silent. Leave. Work.
Deflect.
What's that?
Deflect.
Deflect. Yes. This is about being how safe I am in the world or believe I am in the world. So it's about how engaged I am, how present I am in a relationship, in relationships with people. Okay? What happens when I withdraw? What's the consequence of my withdrawing?
Isolation.
Isolation, exactly. I'm alone. I've just created more pain for myself. Okay? Any questions about this one? Okay. I know I'm doing a little bit of talking right now, but it's your turn's coming. Okay, the next one was caregiving. What are some examples of caregiving?
Taking control of the entire situation.
Okay, taking control. Anything else? Taking responsibility for other people is the big one. Okay, so what does caretaking look like? I went like this because it's sort of a mutual thing instead of a dominant thing, but it's people put themselves under people because they want people to tell them the answers and how to live so they don't have to risk themselves. So remember we talked about the last self-protection we talked about was dependence. This would be a person who was dependent. Okay, because then if you tell me what to do, I don't have to risk somebody being upset with me and by making my own decisions or deciding what I want for myself. Okay? So what happens with me being in that position? How is that a self-protection? And what are the consequences of that?
I don't think people respect people who are caregivers.
You think they do?
I think they don't. I think it's one way to lose respect.
Oh, well, it's risky because if I'm wrong, there's lots of consequences. It's kind of paradoxical because if I am a caregiver and you're right, what I want is respect.
Mhm.
I want you to value me. I want you to think I'm good and important and needed and that kind of stuff.
But if I recognize you using that strategy, then I lose respect for you.
Yeah, but one of the things that there's a lot of pressure to kind of maintain this position and image. It's kind of a false image, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's kind of what you're trying to poke at.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. What else? Good. That's good.
You put yourself above others, and
That's-
so you aren't able to connect with them as long as you're above.
You're not able to do what?
Connect with them.
That's right. That's exactly right. There's no real connection here. This is not the relationship. This is the relationship. What makes this a self-protection? What's driving it?
If I'm in charge, I must be right about it.
Yeah, so there is a sense of control. But what's really driving it is my need to be needed and valued, to be have that position, if you will. Okay. Okay. We're going to do two more quick, and then we're going to move on. Okay. So then we had resistance. And what did that look like? A big wall with arrows. And we talked about kind of passive and aggressive. What were some ones that you guys came up with?
Procrastination.
Procrastination. I'm sorry? Forgetting. Yes. 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 Walking slow. Saying yes and meaning no. What are some aggressive ones? You guys don't know these? You're like, come on. You guys don't have conflict?
One of them was that I had from last week was sly comments and jokes. I don't know if that's right.
What kind of comment?
Sly comments and jokes.
Sly?
Yeah.
I think it's sarcasm.
Yeah.
Sarcasm. Yeah. Just being contrary. Those are good ones. So what happens when I'm resistant? What makes resistant a self-protection? What am I resisting? I'm resisting the fear of the pain of being invisible or irrelevant or being dominated. And so when I am resistant, what am I doing? What just happened? All my energy is going towards not doing what you want me to do. What is the consequence of that? There's a big wall here, but there's another really significant consequence. I am focused solely on not doing what you want me to do. I am not focused on thinking about what I really want for myself or what's good for me. And I do really stupid stuff that hurt myself a lot. And I make other people the problem. So I'm stuck. Okay? Okay. So one more, and we kind of got at it a little bit, and this was being dependent. And we drew dependent being this person down here. I didn't put them underneath because it's this person's choice to put themselves in this position. And oftentimes caretakers are up here and The independent people are down here. What are ways in which people are dependent?
Sorry, I couldn't see it right. You saying that the L would be in the circle of this one?
The circle is the dependent person. Yes,
They forego decision making.
that's right. They forego decisions. Let's say they resist decisions. They want advice. They ask for advice. What else?
Excite pity in someone?
I'm sorry.
Excite pity for yourself or someone?
Tell me more about that.
So if this, as a dependent person, if you're like trying to get someone to be your caretaker, you would go and find them and make.
So how about
really small and
kind of like be a victim?
Yeah.
Okay. Or be helpless. Cool. Or be sick a lot. Okay. So, yes.
I know you really want to move on. Can you do the last one? It's really important to me, the manager.
Yes.
That one.
The caretaker manager.
Oh, I didn't know those were the same one.
Yeah, they're the same thing.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. I just abbreviated it. Okay. So there's two important lessons here. The first lesson is that most people often go through life thinking that it's other people's choices that have the most impact on them. That's how we live often. That is not true. What's true is that, as we can see from the diagrams, is that our choices have significantly more consequence for us than other people's choices. Our choices matter. Our choices have more consequence for us than other people's choices. I'm a counselor and I work with people who have been hurt a lot. I was talking to a woman today who was sexually abused. And when she was being abused, she was a victim. But once people start making decisions about how they're going to live their life and how they're going to respond to being hurt, they're not victims anymore. It's tough. It's hard. I have a lot of empathy for that, but they're not victims anymore, if that makes sense. They're responsible for their choices. And it takes a lot of courage to face into the impact and consequences of being a victim. There's no question about that. But once I start making decisions, and we all do, we all make decisions about how we're going to respond to being hurt all the time. The other thing that's important to note is that when we respond to the conflict of discomfort, and we use comfort management strategies like we're talking about, the ones we listed, it will always, always, always bring more pain. And that's why I read the Romans passage, because what Paul's talking about there is that our choices have consequences. And yeah, that's it. Okay. Any questions about what we talked about last week? Any of the review part? Because we're gonna jump into some new territory. Okay. So what we're looking at again is what I'm focusing on here is really important, is the choices. I'm focusing on the choices that we make. And I'm going to focus on two more choices and how it works. So, okay, I'm going to draw a little bit here for a second. Last week we drew this little model thing here. We called it the what and the how. The what are the subjects. The how is body language, facial expression, all that stuff. And we call the combination of it process. Process is everything that happens when people interact with each other. There's always two levels going on. The what is 7 to 10% of what happens when people interact with each other. The how is 90 to 93%. So that means that your relationships are more about how you interact with each other than what you talk about. I had a number of years ago, there was a couple that had been married for 44 years. They came from Canada for an intensive. I do these 2-week intensives where people come for 3 hours a day for 2 weeks. And they were there, and he was a surgeon and she was a physical therapist. And they've been having the same fight for 44 years. It was about what happened and didn't happen on the honeymoon. And they thought that the conflict was about the what, that they disagreed about what happened, when in fact the conflict was about how they interacted with each other and the history that brought to the relationship and what was represented in all that stuff, but how they responded to their own pain inside of themselves or fear. That was the conflict, how they responded to what was inside of them. Does that make sense? Okay. So there's another piece here, and I'm not sure how to draw this yet. Maybe you guys can help me. There's been research that's done that 18 to 19% of what happens, wrong way. Oh, no, that's right. That's right. 18 to 19% of what happens when we interact with each other, we are cognitively aware of, consciously aware of, rationally aware of. 90 or 80 to 81% is implicit. And what implicit means is we're not aware of it. It's subconscious. So let's say 20%, around 20% is conscious. Around 80% is not. What do you think of that? What does that imply? What does that mean?
Does it mean we're not fighting about what we think we're fighting about?
That's exactly right. We're not fighting about what we think we're fighting about. That means one other important thing. I'm responding to stuff that I don't know about. Let me give you an example, and then I'm gonna have you guys do some work here too. So kind of buckle up. There's two parts to this that I want to get at. The first part is I have over time developed a worldview. My worldview tells me that I am responsible for my choices. I'm responsible for my feelings. You're responsible for your choices and your feelings and what you do with them. That's your responsibility. That's my worldview. Now, when I was a kid, I didn't have that worldview, but as an adult, I have that worldview. When I was a kid, I had experiences where my father got really angry. And because of the nature of anger, because anger assigns responsibility, anger assigns blame, I came to believe that I made my father angry, that I was responsible for his anger. That's called an implicit belief. Whereas my worldview says I'm responsible for myself and my father's responsible for himself. So those are conflicted. They're opposed to each other. Okay? So how do and I would suggest to you that we all have a conflicts between what we think and believe on a conscious level, what our worldview says, and what we implicitly believe about ourselves and relationships. And it's what this stuff that's implicit is what gets mostly played out when we have conflict with other people. So I teach this stuff. I teach people that they're responsible for themselves. Sometimes they get mad at me because they don't want to be responsible for their stuff. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with most of you getting angry with me in here. I'm not okay when my wife gets angry with me. I start acting like I'm responsible for her feelings. My implicit fear kicks in, and I start getting defensive. I can justify myself. I can try to explain myself. I'm responding to an implicit belief that I'm actually responsible for my wife's feelings. So I have a conflict between what I know to be true and how I'm acting. So what that tells me, I mean, that cool thing here is the conflict is helping me see what I'm really responding to, and I get an opportunity to actually learn and work with myself because I have this conflict is mine. It isn't anybody else's. Does that make sense? Any questions about that part? So I'm going to ask you to do something really kind of risky here, okay? And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. But I want you to think about a belief that you have, your worldview about relationships or what you think is true or whatever. And I want you to think about a conflict that you've had or several conflicts you've had and what shows up that might be in conflict with what you actually know. So I want you to think about that. If you're comfortable talking to the person next to you, then do that, have that conversation for a few minutes. Okay? You guys are married, so it's probably been around for a while.
So, Larry, will you restate the task for us?
Sure, I will. So what I want you to do is think about people have patterns of the conflict they have. They usually have the same recurring conflict a lot because we bring ourselves, right? So how we respond to those conflicts are based on implicit beliefs, how we respond. They're the foundation for the kind of choices that we make. In spite of the fact that, for example, I believe I'm not responsible for my wife's feelings, but I act like I am. So I want you to think about a conflict that you have with somebody, maybe Gretchen, that kind of thing happens, where you act completely contrary to what you actually know to be true, yet it shows up. Make sense? Any questions about that? It's kind of a tough one, isn't it? We don't want to really go there. It happens all the time. Wants to share? Wait, why don't you get the mic? Tell everybody who you are.
Oh, my name is Lionel. This is my fiance, Justine. And I think a big one is if you wouldn't have done what you did, then I wouldn't have responded this way. Does that make sense?
Yes. That's kind of making her the problem.
Exactly.
Okay. How's that? So how does that get to what we're talking about here in terms of we have an idea of what's true or belief about what's true, and we have this other thing that's underneath the surface that we know that's not true, but we act like it is.
Well, I know I'm responsible for the way that
I see.
feel, right? Or the way
Yes,
that
I see. Okay.
respond to things, but I'm
Okay.
putting that blame on her.
Yes. That's a good example. That's a great example. Good. Do you do that? Any other examples? Thanks, Lionel. Trish.
So my worldview is that people can think whatever the heck they want about me, and I don't care, because what they think about me is their problem.
Yes.
But what I actually do is spend massive amounts of time trying to make sure that people like me and make sure that I know that they like me.
And how do you do that?
Um,
What does that look like?
I'm still trying to figure that out.
Compliant?
Yeah.
Really, really nice.
Yeah. Being nice to people and doing stuff for them.
Anticipating their needs.
And, yeah.
That would be compliant and accommodating. Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah. That would be that. I know about that one. Yeah. So your worldview is what you tell yourself is you don't really care. It's kind of indifference. You tell yourself a story. And then, but what's really true is that push come to shove, you really work really hard to make sure people do like you. And the conflict is, what's the conflict that you're responding to? Fear that people don't like you. Yes. And that's really uncomfortable. So you work really hard to make sure that doesn't happen. So can I go further with this? Is that okay? Okay. So what are the actual consequences of that? Because that's an example I was going to use for myself.
I end up being a ton more unhappy.
How so?
Because I am spending all of my time analyzing everyone's behavior towards me.
Yes.
And so I'm micro-analyzing things. And
Yes.
so there's like little gestures and things that people do that have nothing to do with me that I can blow completely out of proportion.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I end up being just unhappy and
Some,
believing I'm not approved of at all.
yeah. So you have some anxiety and some pain
Mm-hmm.
that you've brought on yourself.
Yes.
Anything else?
Besides anxiety and pain.
Because you're working really hard here. You know? I really appreciate you doing this, but you're working really hard and you're not getting return on your dollar.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens?
I start thinking that that nothing I do matters.
Okay, so you're reinforcing a belief, another belief that you have that's underneath the surface, that you're not enough.
Mm-hmm.
You're not good enough. What else happens?
I start to lose confidence in the ability of my choices to impact the world around me.
Yes, you believe like your choices really don't matter.
Yeah. Which
is not true. You also get resentful.
Mm-hmm.
And then that puts a wall between you and people. So you just created a whole world of pain for yourself, just by yourself.
Yeah.
That's a great example. Yeah. It's exactly the example that I was going to use for myself, because one of the decisions that I made growing up, I figured out that if I tried hard enough, I worked hard enough, I could avoid my dad's anger. But it was based on the belief that, like, I was responsible to please him. I was responsible for how he responded to me, which is not true. But then the decisions that I make, that's one of the problems with these implicit beliefs. Every time I make a decision based on that implicit belief, I reinforce that belief. Every time. And so that's part of why we keep making the same sort of choices over and over again, because I've reinforced this implicit belief over and over and over again, not even knowing it. Even though I think, I know that I'm not responsible for my dad's anger. Why do I keep acting like it? because I've reinforced that belief for years. And I've developed neural pathways that predispose me to respond that way. Make sense? Okay. Any other examples here? That was good. Thank you very much. Appreciate your openness a lot.
So these categories that we've been talking about, Larry, so when you say self-protection, are you talking about this in kind of like a material survival, my dad's mad at me and something bad physically might happen to me?
No, I'm
Or
thinking
is-
about, that's a good question. I defined it last week, but I didn't redefine it today. Well, I'm using that term to mean that I am managing my comfort level in response to conflict, emotional comfort.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Good question. Thank you.
So, I don't know if everyone else feels this way, but like you slide these concepts along and you work with this every day. And for
Yeah.
you, it's not as big of a deal. I don't think, because you're so steeped in it,
Yes.
but it's like, what you're proposing really is, I think, like, it's like, no, the earth does revolve around the sun. The sun does not revolve around the earth. It's
Yes.
that,
Yes.
it is that big of a paradigm shift
Yes.
that we operate most of our waking hours fundamentally subconsciously.
Yes.
And I didn't, what was your name? Trish? Because what was interesting is during your interactions, I was replaying a difficult thing that happened to me earlier today and going, oh my gosh, I did that. And I didn't even know it until now.
Yes.
It took,
Yes.
it's like this.
That's why learning is so important. That's why looking at conflict and learning from it is so valuable, because then I get to see it. And what we're going to talk about next week is I get to take responsibility for it, which is the foundation for repair. I mean, I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but
This is huge stuff. I mean, it's like
Yes, it
walking
is.
around with a trench coat and like Inspector Gadget, and all of a sudden, like this spring-loaded boxing glove comes out and hits people, and you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't even push a button. I just did that.
yes, yes, yes,
Or hitting myself.
exactly. Yeah, yeah,
And it's that significant. It's that powerful.
yes.
So I
Yes.
might say that every week.
Okay.
Just
There's one other.
because it's huge.
It is very huge. There's another thing that you just clicked off in my brain that I need to say. When we have conflict with what Lionel said was we often make other people the problem. And we're going to talk about that decision by itself here in a minute. But the way we think about conflict is that we think that we're actually responding to this other person. We are not. We are responding to what's inside of us. The conflict is not with the other person. The conflict is within me. It looks like the conflict's with this other person. I'd bet my last dollar it's with this other person, but it ain't. It's with me, within myself. When I respond and get defensive or try to justify myself with my wife, I'm responding to some fear inside of me, not really her. And that's true of all these self-protections, all these strategies that we're looking at. The conflict is inside of me. Okay. So the last choice that I want to look at, again, this choice was we make decisions based on implicit beliefs or fears that we've learned from experiences in the past. My experience was that my dad was angry. My dad was a career Marine Corps pilot. Yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And he was gone half my life fighting wars. But when he was home, our house was inspected every day. So I'm one of 5 kids. Someone would vacuum, someone would dust, someone would mop the floor, someone would clean the bathroom, someone would set and unset the table. every day. And when my dad would get home at 5 o'clock, the house was inspected. And if it wasn't done right, he was angry. So every day there was a risk of someone not doing it the way it was supposed to be done. And he would get angry. So what I learned over a period of time, long period of time, was I made my dad angry. I came to believe that. I came to have that implicit belief. I learned it through experience, not by some reading it in a book. I learned it from the experience of actually having my dad be angry and me be terrified. I came to believe that. The fact is that belief is not true. And I keep making decisions. I can make decisions based on that and reinforce that. That's the problem. The beauty or the gift that, remember I read that quote from Peck last week, is that he called conflict a gift, because I have now the ability to actually learn about what's true about myself and what I'm responding to inside myself and take responsibility for it, rather than, think about the contrast of what would happen in a relationship. Let's say that I'm in a conflict with Jordan here, and I consistently make Jordan the problem. So what's going to happen in that relationship? Distance. But what if I see, by God's grace or whatever, that what the part is I'm playing, and I go to Jordan and I talk about what I was responding to, what I did, what I wanted, and I ask for forgiveness. What happens then? You see the difference between the two responses? It's huge. We're going to talk a lot about that next week. So the last thing I want to talk about tonight is the other choice that we make, and that is we make other people the problem. So you guys we're all experts on making other people the problem here. So we have a target-rich environment here, okay? So I want you to talk about how you've made someone else the problem. Lionel's talked about making Justine the problem. What are some ways you do that? That's real simple to talk about the idea of it, but how do you do that? What does that look like? So what I want you to do is get in your little groups again and confess. Confess how you've made someone the problem. Come up with a couple, because you're probably fairly sophisticated at it. Okay? So remember Adam and Eve? And God shows up in the garden? What do? It was the woman that you gave me, God. And what did Eve do? It was the snake that you created, God. And we've just gotten better and better and better at it. That's what we do. Okay? So have that conversation just briefly. Okay, let's come on back up front here. So how was that? How was that? Is that hard? A little uncomfortable?
I'm still kind of nursing like the Inspector Gadget.
You got that? You have that mental picture now? Yeah. Anybody want to share something they shared? Yes.
So we were kind of talking about like unrealistic expectations you hold of someone.
Yes.
That they would either do something for you or get something for you or think of you, like revolve their world kind of around you, and how that expectation can either lead to anger and that
when it's not fulfilled.
Yeah, when it's not fulfilled, like you didn't do that.
Yes.
When it's like unrealistic expectation.
Yes.
And that can either lead to like blame and like anger, or it can lead, I was talking about how like victimizing myself, like, oh, they didn't think of me.
Okay.
When in reality, it's like their world doesn't revolve around me. I should have just asked, and it causes a lot of like self separation, I think.
So what's the consequence for the relationship?
For me, I think it's a lot of like resentment and like
Yes.
holding bitterness towards someone,
Yeah.
and then eventually like it explodes, and I'll be
Well,
like,
there-
you did this.
Yes. So there's this kind of wall between you and this other person of
Yeah.
this bitterness.
Yeah. And sometimes
Okay.
they don't even know.
Yes. Okay. What's the consequence for you?
I think for me, it causes me to have a lot of like sadness. Like it causes me to be really like
With all that bitterness?
hurt. Yeah. It's like it's like reinforcing like, oh, they don't care about me, or oh, they don't
Yes.
think about me. And so it causes me to like dig myself into a little hole.
I'm
of,
really
like,
not that
pity.
important.
Yeah, a little
Mhm.
pity party for
Yeah,
myself,
yeah,
I think.
So, any other consequences that you can think of for you?
I mean, it's kind of every time I do that, like it reinforces
Yes.
that belief
Yes, it does.
and those kinds
Yeah.
of things, like what you're saying. It makes me not have to take responsibility for
Exactly.
things.
Exactly. The problem's out there. You stuck.
Yeah.
You're not learning anything really about yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. You're focused on that person out there, and that they didn't value you or something like that.
Yeah, totally.
So you didn't learn a thing. So when we point out there, we're not working with ourselves. We're not even understanding that the real conflict is inside of me. Any other people want to share a little bit? Cool.
Hi, my name's Andrew. I'm a complicit. So often I'll be responding to someone who gets big as
Yeah.
their natural recourse.
Yep. Yes.
And it's very easy to slip into, well, I will just sit here and take it, and I will restore peace by not participating in it. And so I just kind of,
Wow.
fade away.
Yes. Disappear.
Mm-hmm. And
Wow.
what that ends up doing is, well, I'm the better person here, because here you are shaking your shaking your fist, and I'm here, and I'm just trying to restore peace, and I'm trying to have a relationship, but you're just yelling at me. So clearly,
that's what happens inside of you.
Mm-hmm.
You don't say that to them.
No,
you just think it.
And so I think that comes out of when someone is angry with me. I'm like, I really don't want someone to be angry with me, because I want peace.
Yeah.
And so I will do whatever I can to create that peace. But what ends up happening is I'm just like, well, I will sit here. I want peace, but clearly this person doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the bad guy. And then I'm doing the exact same thing to myself.
Yeah. So what happens to the relationship?
I kind of have this inner, you said, self-righteousness that, so like I'm really the bigger person.
Yes,
and
yeah.
I'm just,
And what happens inside you?
I get the result that I wasn't looking for, which is I distance myself, and it
Yes.
disrupts my own peace.
How so?
Because when I'm relating with that person later, I like, in my own mind, I'm like, really, you're the bad person here.
Okay.
And that if you're the bad guy, then I'm the good guy. And, that doesn't lead to a productive relationship.
Right. So how does that impact you? And just how does that impact you, do you think?
I think it keeps me from being able to, like, I can understand it. I can even analyze myself and understand that I'm mostly responding to myself, but it makes me think that silence is better than noise. And so I will want to just, anything just churn around in myself.
Yeah.
rather than let anything out, because that's what the bad people do.
Yes. But you get to tell yourself a story
Mm-hmm.
that you're different than other people.
Right.
And the truth is that you're actually blind.
Yes.
And so you're not really learning anything. This is all this is all this is okay. This is all a kind of a script to prove what a great person you are,
Mm-hmm.
at the expense of the relationship in another person.
Right.
Really nice. Yeah. Yes. But you can see what that kind of stuff does when we make other people the problem. And I know I said a lot here, and I appreciate your hearing it, but it's serious stuff. It destroys relationships. It keeps us from seeing that the conflict is with us, not with other people. And it prevents us from actually taking responsibility for ourselves. And it hurts us and it hurts other people badly. It really is incredibly destructive. I mean, all of this stuff, you're not any more than anybody else, but it's really destructive. It's not good. Okay. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Probably not after Andrew.
So one thing that I do is I see a responsibility that's not being taken by anyone else, and I take it upon myself.
Yes.
And then I get fed up with all the others who should also be seeing the responsibility and helping me with it.
Yes.
And I don't bring it to their attention. It usually doesn't even occur to me that that's a possibility. They should just be able to see that it's there.
Really. Why can't they see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I get mad at them for not helping me until I get tired and I break down, and then it finally tends to come out. But I just get really resentful and mad at them and blame them that they aren't seeing and helping me out.
So what's the consequence of that for you in relationships?
Depends on the circumstance. With being house manager here, I came off as a nagging mom, probably way more often than I should have.
Sure.
I also end up distancing myself from a lot of people with it.
Yeah.
And
yes.
It's hard for me to interact with anyone. I go silent with the people that I am resentful towards.
So what's the implicit fear that's operating here?
That I'm alone and I have to carry the burden by myself.
Yeah, or I'm not important enough for people to notice that I need help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Thanks. Good. Okay. I'm going to have to stop here in a few minutes. I want to take any questions anybody has about tonight and what's been said. We've looked at different choices that people have made. Last week we looked at the different ways people self-protect and manage their comfort. Tonight we looked at what drives those choices, implicit fears. We make a lot of choices or decisions based on implicit fears that we have no idea is going on. And then we often make each other the problem. Those choices are what brings that second list that we had. All that pain, that anxiety, anger, all that stuff. That's what happens. Any questions about anything we've said tonight?
So if we become aware that the conflict we're having is not with the other person, it's with ourselves.
Yes.
I'm like picturing this moment where I'm in an argument or a conflict and I just go into my inner chi because I got to untie the knots that I'm doing. Like we can't disengage from the person where.
Usually doesn't happen in the moment.
Right.
Yeah. Usually.
But we're not trying to get to this enlightened moment where we can do that.
No.
Okay.
We're going to talk about that next week too, because we're going to have conflict to the day we die.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do well probably on the day we die. I mean, that's an over exaggeration, but we human beings dislike discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's almost like self-preservation, but we can learn. So this isn't how to not do this. This is not the formula for not having conflict or a formula for figuring out how to do conflict well, necessarily. I think learning about myself and what's true and doing the work that's important has a very positive result in how I'm going to interact with people. There's no question about that. But this isn't about a formula for figuring out how to do it right all the time. This is about how to learn from conflict and take what I learned and come back later, do the work with myself, and then come back later and do repair. That's the point that we're doing here. How can I learn from my choices? And next week, I'm going to hand out a sheet that has a series of questions that's actually going to be kind of a guideline for asking questions that I can ask myself so that I can learn from the conflict that I've had. Okay? Any other questions?
Are you going to address like the genesis of self-protection?
The genesis. Tell me what you're thinking.
Where they come, we're so creative with them, but where do they come from? And
well, I can do that a little bit.
I think there's also something interesting in that, like, I think Larissa's example is that it's actually a real gift that I'm hearing that you have, and like of noticing things and being really spot on. But then this thing happened, and I wonder if that's also the case, in that in some ways it's like self-protections are a gift maligned.
In a gift that it's sort of gives us information to learn from. Is that what you mean?
Well, there's like an implicit gift, I think, in like for someone who's big and like, oh, I don't know. It's just something I'm thinking about.
Okay.
But I can see how the gifts that God's given me, I actually self-sabotage kind of in that way. Like,
yes,
I'm really good at this. And then like this thing comes in and I blindside myself.
Yes.
And actually cut my own knees out.
Yeah.
Because of my own insecurities or whatever.
Okay.
Anyway. But more I was thinking about where
they come from.
Yeah.
How they get developed.
Our own suite of self-protections.
Yeah.
How do they? So, and
I can spend some time next week talking.
It's really not like critical. I just thought, it's interesting how, because you can have in the same family, you can have this wide variation of how they.
Absolutely. So. Like, I'm one of 5. Like I said, my older sister was the smart one, self-proclaimed, knew everything, and you should defer to her. I was sort of just withdrawn, kind of trying to be invisible, trying to stay out of trouble. There was a Larry rule. The Larry rule, when I was like 12 years old, 10, 12 years old, I was very inquisitive and had lots of questions about trying to figure things out and understand things. And I asked a lot of questions. And so the rule was I had to count to 10 before I asked the question. And at the end of 10, if it was still important, then I could ask it. And I did it a few times and it like worked. And I'm thinking, here it is, the solution. So anyway, so I learned not to talk. Well, that would be an example of trying to be quiet, trying to be invisible, to stay out of trouble, to avoid the pain. I was going to say something else, but I just kind of went blank. Any other questions? You guys have been great. Taking some risk here tonight and talking about yourselves and being open with the group. I appreciate it a lot. It's very helpful. I think it also says that we're all here together, playing fields level, all that stuff. Any questions? Yes.
Is it always a bad thing to choose comfort?
That's a really good question. I think that comfort is a bad goal. I think goodness is the goal. Comfort is the consequence of choosing goodness. It shouldn't be the goal. Because when comfort's the goal, we make ourselves drug addicts.
That's fair.
It's too important. I think there's been a shift in our culture in the last 40 years. And I think people have been choosing comfort for a long, long time, so since the beginning. But I think there has been a shift. I think there was this idea in the 50s and the 40s and 50s, and I think the major shift happened in the 60s, that there was this idea that good was good. I think that's gone for most part in the culture. I think I think comfort has become the good. Think about the commercials you see on TV. What are half of them about? Taking some sort of medication to relieve some sort of suffering. It's constant. You deserve not to suffer, is the message over and over and over and over again. How often does a commercial for erectile dysfunction come up on TV? All the time.
So if I have the money for it, say I want a new couch, and I'm choosing that because, I want to use this money for this couch because, I want to be comfortable. Is that
No.
bad?
We're talking about how we interact with each other when there's conflict. I'm not saying having a nice couch is a bad thing. But if I'm spending money to go in debt when I should be putting food on the table, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, also, what if the relationship isn't as personal? Would it be bad to choose?
Well, give me an example.
I didn't think of an example.
So one way that I've run into conflicts outside of personal relationships is running into someone at a store who just randomly starts yelling at you.
Yes.
Just thinking of that. That was exactly that happened
Yes.
this week.
So how do we respond to that?
Yeah.
What would be so how do you respond to that in a good way? Is that what your question is, and not just choose
Or
comfort?
is it, I believe going along your lines is it not okay to seek comfort in that sort of situation?
Well, part of what happens when we have conflict with people is we sort of, especially when in close relationships, is we just kick into the sort of default self-protection. We want comfort now kind of thing. In a situation like that, I think there's lots of options. I mean, what do you think how people would normally respond to that? Most commonly respond to somebody yelling at them.
Let me get a manager.
What's that?
Let me get a manager. It's my usually default response.
Okay, let me get a manager. So you walk away and go get help. Okay.
My experience
That's
with
one.
being on the bus and having someone yell at other people on the bus, they just ignore them. They look
Okay, you
away
can
and
ignore them.
they
Yeah,
try to avoid any contact.
especially eye contact. Yeah, avoid eye contact. What else? Bus is another culture.
Yeah. Yes.
They try and maybe calm down the other person.
I don't think that's going to work because that's about you. Because you're responding to the conflict inside of you. You're trying to manage the situation. They're going to feel managed, and they're going to go bigger, most likely.
Right.
So.
That could happen looking away or
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's lots and lots of options. I think a good option would be, I'm sorry you're having a bad day. Is there some way I can help you or listen to you? But if you want to talk, I'd be happy to listen to you if you want to calm down and talk calmly, something like that, and say that calmly.
Well, that's not necessarily a problem I have, but I was just mostly saying, in a situation, is it not okay to choose myself over the other person?
I think if there's a safety issue involved, sure. But I think it's always, obviously there's different situations and you kind of have to be in the moment. So I'm not sure how to answer that.
That's why I was thinking.
Yeah.
A little bit more broad.
I think it's always right to try to do good, pursue goodness.
I think that makes sense a lot, actually.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good question. In
In
both situations, you want comfort.
Yes.
But
not at the expense of goodness.
Right. So the bus or the store or something, but what do you want? What's the difference between that and the kind of comfort you want in a relationship?
Right. So the question is the intent.
So what's the intent in a relationship?
To say what I said to the person on the bus or what?
No, there's a different brand of comfort that I want from my self-protections versus just doing what any ordinary person would do to try to manage and de-escalate a situation in public.
Yes.
What's my intent?
Are you?
This microphone.
I have to stop in a minute here, but go ahead.
If I'm understanding the situation, it isn't necessarily what any person would do and de-escalate it, and that's choosing goodness in the situation, because you've just been yelled at, which probably triggered something where self-protection or to feel good would be raising back and putting that person in there. Like comfort is not giving that person any power when we actually give them some by de-escalating something like that. Like choosing goodness is what doesn't belittle that person, but our comfort makes sure that that person leaves smaller than us, wouldn't it?
I'm just trying to be respectful and kind.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Because I think
I'm not sure I'm understanding the question.
If someone's yelling at me on the bus, I'm like, you don't even know me.
Yes.
So I can't really totally be offended.
Right. Of course.
But if my wife is yelling at me, whoa, okay, you do know me.
Sure.
And you're.
So what if
there's something there, I think, that's getting at the heart of this difference.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yes, sure.
Because I think the question is really good. Because no, comfort's not always bad.
Right. That's right.
So anyway, we can explore it more.
Okay. Thank you very much. See you guys next week. Talk a lot about repair. Cool.